Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to introduce Gabe Gomez, our fabulous ASL interpreter. Please make sure to pin his video to gallery view. And if you have any questions, post them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am currently on the traditional lands of the Chumash peoples. I want to recognize that we are all connected with one another and that the ground beneath my feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples. Today, we will hear from our featured guest, award-winning filmmaker Grace Lee. Her award-winning film, American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Grace Lee Boggs, tells the story about a Chinese-American philosopher, writer, and activist who spent her life in Detroit with a unique vision on what American Revolution can be. Grace Lee Boggs spent most of her life fighting for equal rights and labor rights and really challenged people to think about their own activism. Even though the film was made several years before the passing of Grace Lee Boggs in 2015, the message is timeless and so very poignant to what's happening in America right now. I want to thank our partners. We have the honor and privilege of having the White House Initiative on Asian American Pacific Islanders, the California API Commission, Asians American Advancing Justice Los Angeles, and Asians in LA here with us today. We truly look forward to expanding our partnerships with all of you. So now let's hear from some of our partners at the White House Initiative on Asian American and Pacific Islanders. Welcome, Laura Shin, Acting Executive Director and Designated Federal Officer, White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and Howard O, Associate Director, White House Office of Public Engagement, and Erika Moritsugu, Deputy Assistant to the President and Asian American and Pacific Islander Senior Liaison. Let's play the video.
Happy Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. My name is Laura Shin, and I'm the Acting Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, located in the Washington, D.C. area. It's a pleasure to join you today and to be partnering with the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media to bring you this fireside chat with filmmaker Grace Lee to discuss her documentary, American Revolutionary, the story of Grace Lee Boggs. I also want to acknowledge the other partners for this event: Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles, Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs, Asians in Los Angeles, and special shout out to Cherry Destura, the WIOPI Regional Lead for the Southwest and Region 9, and Nancy Yoon for their leadership in organizing this event. As background, WIOPI was established in the Clinton administration, and its mission is to serve the needs of the API community across the country and connect them to the resources of the federal government. We are fortunate to work closely with the White House, specifically with Erika Moritsugu, the new Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Liaison, and Howard O, the Associate Director at the White House Office of Public Engagement. Some points about the API community. The community is comprised of over 22 million people and over 7% of the population in this country, with over 50 ethnicities and 100 languages. We are not a monolith, and there is so much diversity within the community. We are also the fastest growing demographic in the country and have so much to contribute to this nation. My hope is that this event, with filmmaker Grace Lee discussing the social justice work of Grace Lee Boggs, will be an inspiration for the community as we recover from the impacts of the pandemic and the hate. Along those lines, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that the work of the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media to create gender balance and foster inclusion is so crucial, as we know that media is one of the most important factors influencing our values and aspirations. Their data-driven research, education, and advocacy empowers and inspires advertisers and content creators to reimagine the media landscape to reflect our ever-changing society. Documentary films also play a hugely important role, as these films are made to inform and educate with facts, and real-life events. By telling these stories and shining a light on the reality around us, perhaps more content creators will continue to be inspired to create diverse and authentic characters on screen. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please enjoy the conversation with filmmaker Grace Lee discussing her documentary, American Revolutionary.
Hi, everybody. My name is Howard O, and I'm one of the Associate Directors for the White House Office of Public Engagement. It's an honor to be here with you all, and I appreciate you making some time for me as I make some remarks. This May, during Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we recognize the history and achievements of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders across our nation. And in the midst of a difficult year of pain and fear, we reflect on the tradition of leadership, resilience, and courage shown by our AA and HPI communities and recommit to the struggle for AA and HPI equity. As today you guys are joining a fireside chat with the awesome, trailblazing Grace Lee, this is in partnership with the White House Initiative on Asian American Pacific Islanders. So it's an honor to be here in solidarity and in partnership with my wonderful teammates, Erika Moritsugu and Shin, the intern ED. So on that note, I want to wish you all an awesome event. Thank you all for being here, and just also want to say that I'm really excited for the trailblazing history and legacy that Grace Lee has brought upon our communities, and we're really excited for what's ahead for our country, especially in this administration and under a president and vice president that see us and hear us and uplift us. Thank you so much. Have a great event.
Aloha, y'all. I appreciate you allowing me to make some remarks before your conversation today as part of Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I want to acknowledge the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media and the White House Initiative on AAPIs for partnering to bring you this fireside chat with filmmaker Grace Lee to discuss her documentary, American Revolutionary, the story of Grace Lee Boggs, an activist and changemaker that blazed a path for so many in the AA and NHPI community, including me. In my new role, I serve as the Deputy Assistant to the President and AA and NHPI Senior Liaison at the White House, and I'm coming into this new position at a time of persistent anti-Asian hate and violence, and during a pandemic that's taken a severe economic and personal toll on the AA and NHPI communities. I intend to be a strong voice in the administration on behalf of the AA and NHPI communities, and I'll work closely with the White House Office of Public Engagement to include the national AA and NHPI organizations, and with WIAPI, which connects the AA and NHPI communities to the resources of the federal government. Now, I've spent my entire life as a professional and a volunteer, fighting for social justice and the empowerment of communities and individuals, and I'll continue to do that in the White House with the confidence of a president who sees us and hears us and values us, and is committing to providing us with the safety and opportunity that we should expect and can now hope for. On his first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order advancing racial equity throughout the federal government. In response to the spike in anti-Asian hate and violence, the president also acted quickly and resolutely in his first week in office by issuing a presidential memorandum condemning racism, xenophobia, and intolerance against the AA and NHPI communities. And the president just signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act that passed by an overwhelming margin in the House and Senate. This critical legislation will bring our nation one step closer to achieving justice and equality for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. Today, I'm so glad we can take this moment to recognize Grace Lee, who has brought us so many amazing documentaries focused on the Asian American narrative. I'm especially moved and inspired by the story of Grace Lee Boggs, the focus of the film being discussed here today. Grace Lee Boggs was a philosopher, writer, and activist, rooted for 75 years in the labor, civil rights, and Black Power movements, who fought for social justice and change. Filmmaker Grace Lee had the privilege of getting to know Grace Lee Boggs while making this film, and we're here today to hear more about that experience, what she learned from Grace Lee Boggs, and how, now more than ever, her message can inspire all of us to stand up for what's right. Although the communities had a difficult year of pain and fear, I want to take this time today to recognize that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders across our nation have a long history of achievement and perseverance. I hope we can embrace the noble examples of leadership, resilience, and courage shown by AA and NHPI communities, and recommit to the work that needs to be done to ensure the safety, justice, equity, and opportunity for our AA and NHPI communities. Mahalo nui loa for the opportunity to join you today.
Thank you so much. Deeds, not words. So we're extremely heartened to hear the actions of our administration and our president and our partners. And now we have one more special message to share. Connie Chung is the CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles and a friend of Grace Lee's. Welcome, Connie Chung.
Hi, I'm Connie Chung, the CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles. It's our honor to be partnering with the Geena Davis Institute on Gender and Media to shine a light on Grace Lee Boggs, an important figure in our AAPI history and a personal hero. And I'm so proud to introduce my friend, Grace Lee, the filmmaker behind the documentary, American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Grace Lee Boggs. I met Grace 8 or 9 years ago when we were both in the NetCal Leadership Program for Korean Americans. I was already a fan of Grace from her earlier work, The Grace Lee Project, a documentary that talked about Asian American identity and stereotypes. I recall Grace sharing with me how she was making another documentary about this incredible civil rights activist, Grace Lee Boggs, a Chinese American woman in Detroit, Michigan, who dedicated her life to addressing systemic racism and anti-Blackness in our country. Particularly now, as we see the rise in anti-Asian hate, and we reflect on the anniversary 1 year later of George Floyd, which sparked through the Black Lives Matter movement, a public reckoning around structural racism and anti-Blackness in our society. We need to know Grace Lee Boggs, who epitomized allyship and solidarity. The very talented filmmaker Grace Lee has won a Peabody Award for this film. She was Emmy nominated for Makers, Women in Politics, and her PBS Asian American piece is a must-see to understand American history and why we are seeing the scapegoating of Asian Americans that we do today. Please join me in welcoming Grace Lee.
Well, I don't know what more we could possibly say. So I am very happy to welcome Grace Lee. So Grace, thanks for being with us. And I know we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to get right into it. All of you have seen the phenomenal work that you did. So my first question to you is, A, did Grace have a chance to see the film before she passed? And what was her reaction?
Thank you, Madeline. And I just also want to thank the Geena Davis Institute, Connie, of course, and the White House speakers for introducing this panel. The question is, did Grace have a chance to see the film before she passed away at age 100? Yes, she did. And it was, she was really taken by the film. I mean, throughout the making of the project, which lasted over 10 years, not full time, obviously, but she was always, she gave me a lot of space. You know, she was really interested in, you know, maybe what my interpretation of her life might be. And she was always kind of encouraging, but never put any pressure on it. So I was nervous, of course, but when she actually saw the film, she really connected to it. And one of the things that I remember her saying, which moved me quite a bit, was she said that it really captured the love story between her and her husband, James Boggs. You know, it's an American revolutionary story, but they also, you know, loved America enough to want to change it. So that really stuck with me.
And I want to go, I mean, what really struck me also is at the end, towards the end of the film, you know, you asked Grace about having any doubts, if she had any frustrations, if she felt she had made any mistakes. And I'm curious because it was important for you to hear her say that. And I know you said, like, I'm trying to get her to answer these questions. She's not answering questions. She said she would come back to you. Did she ever come back to you with a response on any of those?
It's kind of interesting when you make a film, these moments sort of stand in as like, time kind of stops, but obviously it's just one moment that you capture in an incredibly rich and complex life. I think Grace, of course, she's a human being with complex emotions. She did have doubts. She did have frustrations. She probably felt like, she didn't want to talk about them at the moment. I think that's maybe more of a generational thing of people wanting to talk about, these issues. But I did witness some of these vulnerabilities and frustrations, especially as she was aging. I think she says toward the end of the film that, aging is, there's so much pride involved. And I can see this with elders I know right now. It's really challenging. And I think that she had a lot of those kind of vulnerable moments as she was getting close to transitioning. So yeah, I appreciate she didn't come back directly with, the question that I asked her, but I think that just through her actions and seeing her move through the world, I felt that.
So we have a lot of artists and content creators who are watching this, and from an artistic creative process, this film didn't happen overnight. It was quite, a journey, 10 years. So, as a filmmaker, how do you go in and out? How did you determine how you would plot? What was the blueprint from going from A to Z? What was your process in trying to make this film?
It's really interesting that you mentioned the word blueprint, because there's a really great interview with Grace Lee Boggs where she talks about how movements happen and how there is no blueprint many times. You sort of make your path by walking. And in many ways, that's what happened with this film. When I first met Grace, I was still in film school, and I was making another film called The Grace Lee Project. And Grace said, come to Detroit. And as soon as I saw her in her element in Detroit, I knew that there was a longer, more complex film, not just about our common name, but about all the movements she'd been involved in, her commitment to Detroit, her commitment to, fighting racism and inequality throughout her life. So I just wanted to spend time with this person. I didn't know how this film would be made. I didn't even know if I was capable of doing it. I had never taken on something so epic before, one person's life, plus all of this history and movements. But I think, just as Grace evolves through her life, sort of these ideas and lessons of evolution and thinking dialectically really guided us through the making of the film. There's of course all the challenges of raising the money, and how do you make a film about a 90-something-year-old woman who spends most of her time thinking and having conversations. It's not really cinematic, so there's a lot of trying to figure out how to make it visual and make it cinematic and make it kind of sing with what's so exciting about Grace Lee Boggs, which is her ideas and how her mind works. But that was a process over many years with some great collaborators, and just kind of kind of making our path as we walked it.
So when you think about the hours and hours and hours and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of footage that you had, how did you determine what were the key points and the key takeaways that you wanted to showcase? And were there things that they say killing your darlings that killed you, that you had to edit out? Can you walk through that part of your artistic process?
Yeah, I think it's when you're making a film, I mean, it has to be something that is not like, could this have been an article? Like one of the things that Grace has done is she's written a lot of books. She wrote her own autobiography. She's written all kinds of pamphlets. She's a great writer. And I was thinking about like, what is it that a film can do? What can it capture that her books can't, because she's a great writer. And so, for me, I kept coming back to the feeling I got when I first met Grace Lee Boggs, when I first sat in an audience and watched her speak and watched her mind work, and how she was able to like handle any kind of, she could debate like hardcore Marxists, and then she could also talk to like a middle school student. She was such a could talk to anybody. And I was really fascinated by that. But I guess to answer your question, yeah, it was like, what are the things that are most exciting to me about her life? And it was really the ideas and the evolution of ideas as they moved through all of these movements through American history. I think sometimes there's people who want to know more about her family background or her personal background, but she didn't really talk about that too much. She was really excited about the ideas and the movements and the organizing. And so, I figured that you could always go back and read the book, to learn about the details of her childhood. But, just to see how she thinks dialectically, how does she move, how does her philosophy interact with her activism? That was something that I really was craving. And I think that's where we made the focus of the film.
And so I do want to talk a little bit more about, we talked about your art. I'd love to also talk about your advocacy and activism, which of course the film is one, but can you tell us a little bit about ADOC, a national network that works to increase the visibility and support Asian Americans in the doc field? And I hope we can post a link to it in the chat. What inspired you to create it? What does it do? And what do you need? What's the call to action from all of our viewers today on how they can support the organization?
Yeah, thanks for bringing ADOC up. ADOC is the Asian American Documentary Network. It's a collective of Asian Americans working in nonfiction, whether, we're mostly filmmakers, but there's also programmers, writers, executives, curators, anyone kind of connected to nonfiction, the nonfiction storytelling world. We basically, my co-founder Leo Chang and I started ADOC about 5 years ago, out of the need, to sort of uplift and help resource and mentor Asian Americans in this field. Both he and I have been doing this for about 20 years and nobody really helped us figure things out. We achieved a certain amount of success and figured things out by ourselves, but we figured for the next generation of Asian American storytellers, we could kind of not let them have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. And also just kind of create community. I think it's really important when, filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking, is such an isolating experience that when you find others, you sort of build community. I actually got a lot of inspiration from Grace Lee Boggs. She's an organizer. I never really considered myself an activist, but I realized that I could organize where I'm at, and to me, that's as a filmmaker and sort of my community in that way. If people are interested, you can check out the website that's there. I think the best way to support is to subscribe to the newsletter. We take donations if you want, but really, if anyone in the audience is interested in whether they're filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers or audience members, you can, sign up for ADOC and keep track of what we're doing. We actually just launched a Asian American, last year during the pandemic, we launched an Asian American COVID Stories initiative, short films, and we're doing another one about Asian American resilience, which we hope people can check out. But go to the website, you can find out more.
And no donation is too large, as we always say, at the Institute. So can you talk about the project that you did, the 2-part documentary, She Could Be Next, about women of color transforming American politics, which came out in 2020, and I believe it's available on Amazon and many other digital platforms. What sparked your interest in creating the series?
It's interesting to think about, and She Could Be Next, because, and we're talking about Grace Lee Boggs because, the film is about women of color, both as candidates and as organizers who are transforming American politics. Demographics have shifted so much, even within my own lifetime that, we know that by 2040 something, America will be majority people of color, right? And so we wanted to track a political story that told, the story of this country's politics with an unapologetic, focus on race and gender, because it's such an important any political story, is we see a lot of political stories, but we don't necessarily see them focusing on women of color. And in this piece, we were able to cover historic candidates in 2018, including Stacey Abrams, who was running for governor of Georgia, Rashida Tlaib, now Congresswoman from Detroit. It was really cool to see how these women were kind of harnessing, kind of what's out there already, yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of an evolution of the things I've always been interested in, communities, women, stories about women, communities of color, organizing. I loved having another Detroit connection, because it was great to be able to see like what Grace Lee Boggs was a certain generation of activists in Detroit. Rashida Tlaib is a completely different one, but they're on a similar trajectory, right? And all the women who were candidates, what I thought was so fascinating, we chose women who actually came from organizing as well. They didn't just wake up when Trump was elected and decided they needed to, run for office. They were already, rooted in their communities, speaking out for their communities and organizing on their behalf. And running for office was just like a natural, extension of what they were already doing.
So in terms of looking forward, is there anything you're working on now? Are there kind of themes, concepts, building on the stories about women, politics, activism? What may we see coming from you in the next few years?
I mean, I have a lot of different interests, like I definitely am always drawn to stories of women. I'm definitely drawn to Asian American stories just because I know not many people are telling those stories, and it's such a incredibly rich and diverse community that we don't hear enough from. But one of the things that has sort of come up more recently that mixes the kind of politics and organizing questions is I wrote an essay last fall that was basically a critique of public television and how it's not meeting its mandate of a diversity of perspectives. And so it's turned into a kind of movement to sort of change public television to actually reflect the country that we live in. I can share a link for anyone interested. But yeah, I wrote an essay for the Ford Foundation talking about the need for more than one lens. That sort of sparked a kind of exchange with the president of PBS and me and a bunch of people, and this Beyond Inclusion collective of documentary filmmakers was born, and we're moving forward with that. So anyway, it's again the theme of And She Could Be Next is there's an organizer in all of us, and so maybe from the lessons of Grace Lee Boggs, I realized like that can also happen in whatever field you're in, whether it's film, politics, law, academia, etc. So
it's one action at a time. Well,
yes.
I know we have some questions for you from our audience, and I want to introduce Jennifer Saw, who is our Senior Manager of Industry Outreach. Jenny, you have some questions for Grace?
Yes. Can you describe how your relationship with Grace Lee Boggs changed through the years of making the documentary, and how the relationship with your subject informed some of your filmmaking choices?
Yeah, with Grace, in the beginning, I was kind of intimidated by her, sort of put her on a pedestal, kind of like an elder. And you'll notice if you watch the film, early interviews are very formal, in a living room asking questions. But by the end of the film, Madeline, as you saw, we're in her kitchen table, just talking casually. I think I sort of learned from Grace that she really likes conversation and she likes to challenge people, and I think I might have picked that up from her when I challenged her. There was a moment, I talked about how she didn't like to talk so much about personal stuff, but I said, I really want to hear more about, kind of like your emotional connection to some of these things that happened in your life. And she would say something like, well, you'll just have to ask the right question, in her Grace Lee Boggs way, always kind of pushing, these questions, which always challenge and also sort of, it's her way of challenging us. And I appreciated that.
Um, can you please speak about how your films connect with one another? Barrier Device, The Grace Lee Project, American Revolutionary, She Could Be Next. What is your next project?
I mean, all the films, everything I made is personal, even though they may not be as personal as the Grace Lee Project. I tend to take on topics that interest me, that kind of connect in some way, and they can be very, I have a wide eclectic range of interests. But yeah, I think that's the connection. I mean, all of those titles that you named all have Asian American women in them. So, I think that it's Asian American women are still incredibly under-resourced and underutilized community. And there's such a rich array of stories that are connected to us. My next project, I'm not sure yet. I'm actually taking a break from a very busy 2-3 years with both And She Could Be Next and Asian American. So I'm sort of thinking about what that could be.
We're all looking forward to what's next. Next question would be, Grace Lee Boggs was amazing in building bridges. How can we build allyship with our Asian and Black communities?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's just important to, like Grace, just start conversations. I mean, it's so basic, I think. But with Grace, what I really learned from her is that she's such an incredible active listener. She spent years in Detroit, when she was married to James Boggs. She said, I just spent several years like listening and trying to understand the community, what the needs were, right? I think I take a lot from that. Just being open and also sort of speaking out when you see injustice happening. I think right now there's so much tension because of all of the anti-Asian hate happening, all the anti-Black hate happening, and to realize that everyone is, all of this tension, all of the racism is not because of what Asians and Blacks did to each other. It's because of white supremacy, right? There's a really interesting project that I'm tangentially involved in. It's the May 19th project that Renee Tajima Pena and Jeff Chang started on May 19th, which is the joint birthday of Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama, another incredible Japanese American activist. We're releasing short videos, 2-minute videos of kind of a hidden history between Black Asian solidarity or Asian and other communities of color solidarity every day. I can also drop that link in the chat. It's really educational. There's so many things I'd never learned about, but if you want to follow that, I did a short one for Grace Lee Boggs for that project as well. So
I think this will be the last question. Do you have a personal or memorable anecdote about Grace Lee Boggs that you would like to share with our audience?
I guess the first time I met her, I was a film student at UCLA. And I had seen a flyer that Grace Lee Boggs was coming to campus. And this is before I had actually really started the Grace Lee Project. And I thought, oh, this person, I need to meet this person. And I showed up at some student meeting, a very small student meeting she was having with some Asian American studies students, I think. And I was immediately struck by, this elderly woman with this really short bowl cut, speaking in this kind of New England accent. And I got the nerve to go introduce myself to her. And I said, hey, this may seem really strange, but my name is also Grace Lee. I'm making a film about other women named Grace Lee. Could I interview you? And she looked at me and she seemed fascinated. She's like, who is this person? And she's like, well, you should come to Detroit. And so that was like the first time she kind of uttered this challenge, like, what about this? And so me and 2 friends went to Detroit, and immediately, we kind of fell in love with the place. We sort of realized immediately that this isn't just about, again, the common Grace Lee name, but that this was a much deeper, complicated story that we needed to learn how, she got here.
So Jenny, I think there's one more really good question.
Yeah. If you could ask Grace Lee Boggs any question today, what would it be?
Wow. God, there's so many questions, and suddenly I'm drawing a blank. I guess I'd be really curious to hear her take on what's happening now in current events. I think we just passed the anniversary of George Floyd's murder. We've been living through all of this anti-Asian violence. She was somebody who didn't grow up during an Asian American movement, but sort of became embraced by Asian Americans as a kind of icon and symbol. So I would love to hear, where she sees all of this now, and where, does it track with her experiences in the past? Does she have ideas about how to move beyond this moment or move through this moment? Yeah, I'd love to hear what she would have to say.
Beautiful closing words. So I just want to thank Grace Lee. Jenny, thanks for moderating the Q&A. Thank you so much to Gabe. Thanks to our audience. And there's a lot of resources in the chat and links. So you can watch some of the other films, from Grace Lee. And I just want to thanks for all of our members and partners for today. This was a very important conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.